It was so raw and just so upsetting. I did not know what to do. And so I simply posted a broken heart emoji on LinkedIn, just one single character, no other words, just the emoji. And that went, hilariously. It was the most viral thing I think I've ever done in my life, certainly on LinkedIn.
Welcome to the Builder Story. Learn from people who have built really cool stuff that matter.
Jason Dunn has spent about half a decade at Amazon Web Services as a principal community manager. Folks from the community calls him the father of AWS Community Builders program. Jason, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Shafraz. I appreciate being here very much.
Thank you so much, Jason, for joining. I know about yourself, but why don't you give an introduction about yourself? What's your background? And how you got into DevRel?
I've been doing community for a long time. And my background is actually in communications, but I never really went into communications. I always thought community and technology was more interesting. I was self-employed for a number of years, did my own technology website, and my websites had built-in community, via forums. Did that for a while. And then in 2011, I moved to the United States. I'm Canadian, so I moved from Canada. And then I started my journey into, working for corporations. So I worked for HTC, I worked for AT&T Business as a contractor. And then in 2020, I joined AWS to build the Community Builders program. And like you said, I was there for basically 6 years. And I am no longer there now. So looking for my next thing.
Can you tell a little bit about what kind of communities have you created before and how do you manage this community?
My very first community I ever managed was over a dial-up modem. So that's how long I've been doing communities. And so this was, a dial-up modem back in the bulletin board days. And back then it was just a bunch of, tech enthusiasts. And I was like moderating an online, bulletin board forum. And then, I got involved in use groups, Usenet way back then, supporting actually Windows CE, which is, for those of us that have been around for a while, that was Microsoft's embedded operating system for their little handheld, devices, Pocket PCs, palm-sized PCs. There's a whole era there of Microsoft efforts. And that's when I really started to enjoy, using my knowledge to help people, and my natural tendency to want to moderate, help people, provide some structure. That was noticed by some folks at Microsoft, actually an engineer at Microsoft, and they said, hey, we have this thing called an MVP program. Do you want to become an MVP? And I said, that sounds interesting. And that was really my very first time. So that was in the late 90s. I think it was 96 or 97. That was the very first time I'd ever sort of been invited to join a formal community with benefits and things. And that's when I thought, wow, this is amazing. There's a multi-billion dollar, back then, this is Microsoft. I don't think they were $1 trillion company, multi-billion dollar company acknowledging the work that I was doing to essentially help their customers. And I thought, well, this is just amazing. And that there was a whole journey, where I was an MVP for 15 years. And part of that journey was me leaning into my community experience. And, there was just so much opportunity for me to create my own community and bring my kind of activity in the Usenet forums onto a website. And so that's where I launched some of my early, technology communities. And then, just sort of from there, things just grew and grew. And I really leaned into community. But then I also leaned into a business model that was kind of different. And some people still don't understand. They're like, how were you able to do this? All of my websites were basically run by me and a whole bunch of volunteers. So people were reviewers, moderators in the forums. I had editors, who would do blog posts and do write-ups, and they were all volunteers. And so, I made a living off of the advertising, but it's really hard to make a living off of just advertising. I didn't have, any kind of sponsorship model back then. And so I managed to eke out a living. I didn't get rich off of it, but I thought what was really interesting was that if someone really cares about a topic, if somebody really cares about, technology, and you say, hey, I'm going to give you a platform to talk about technology and establish yourself as a thought leader, someone who wants to share with other people, people are really, really eager to do this. And so I never had any shortage of people that wanted to be reviewers or, editors and things. And so I think that's when I really started to, put together the pieces of like, if someone's really passionate about something and you give them an opportunity and then, both sides benefit. I think that's actually a core function of how community needs to work, is that you have to have like reciprocal value where both people in the equation are getting a benefit from being part of the community.
Most of the learnings that you had previously running HTC communities and then Microsoft being a Microsoft MVP for 15 years, which is not an easy thing to do for being an MVP for 15 years. So just to follow up a little bit on that part, what has changed now? Like in communities, in your sense, that what you see?
One thing that is common in all the communities I've run, and hopefully will be common in all communities for a long time until maybe, I don't know, someday we'll have a community of agents and it'll be like multiple and it's just a bunch of AI talking to each other. But let's say we don't go there. We just talk about communities. No matter who's in the community, they're made up of people, and people all have essentially the same base, like, intrinsic needs, right? You want a place to belong. You want a place that you feel comfortable in. You want a place that gives you value for showing up, and taking part. And so any community, whether it's consumers or small business owners or developers or healthcare professionals, like no matter who it is, the community manager, the program manager has to provide value for that community. And so part of any community is, running it is figuring out what is that value, So when I started at, HTC and I was doing an advocacy program, it was consumers. And so these were people that were buying HTC phones that were just huge fans of, mobile technology and HTC's approach to design and software and all this other stuff. And so it was pretty easy to figure out, how do I deliver value to them? Inside access, sneak peeks about new things, sample phones that, no one else has. And so that to me was actually a pretty easy nut to crack because I could see their passion bubbling over in everything I did. When I was working for AT&T Business and we were doing a small business community, that is probably the most challenging audience I've ever worked with because I don't think there's anyone busier than a small business owner, right? For most jobs, you have a 9 to 5 or, maybe it's 8 to 7, a lot of us, especially in the corporate world, might work longer hours. But fundamentally, the success and failure of everything is not on your shoulders. You're part of a team, you're part of an organization. So a small business owner, I think, is one of the most challenging audiences to engage with and especially deliver value to them. So I would say that was my most challenging audience I've ever dealt with. And then when I started at AWS, I was honestly very worried about the developer audience. I thought, I'm not a developer. How do I figure out what these developers want? Well, lucky for me, developers are still human beings and they want a lot of the same things that everyone else wants, right? They want a place to belong. They want a place to learn. They want value. And so that was part of, what I built with the Community Builders program was just things that developers value. But no matter what the community is, the secret to success is just figuring out, who your audience is and creating a place that they feel welcome and a place that they get value from.
In 2020, back then I was working for Google, and then I have a friend, his name is Harshad Zakaria. Zach, the AWS leader now. So Zach is someone who told me, hey Shaf, there's a really good program that has been started off globally called AWS Community Builders. And then it's picking up. There's a certain momentum that's been created as well. Jason, you from 2020 or period onwards, like till 2026, you've been running this program. Most part started being just the single person running the program to you had a team that was managing by the time that you left the company as well. So take us back in 2019 when Ross Barrage wrote the paper to get your secure your headcount, and then what was actually AWS trying to solve for, and then what was the initial vision that you had for AWS Community Builders program?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that was an interesting time. So in 2019, I was still working for AT&T Business as a contractor, and I became a contractor to get my green card. At the time, if you asked me who AWS was, I don't think I could have told you who AWS was. So just to be like 100% clear, I knew nothing about cloud. I wasn't a developer. But back then, Ross Birch, who's an amazing community leader, an amazing leader, he was running the Heroes program. And the way he described it to me was that they would, be out at, conferences. They would be, they were doing reInvent, and other developers would kind of come up to them, in the booth and talk, and they're talking about community, and other people wanted to basically engage with AWS. They wanted to kind of go deeper with AWS and join a community. And the only two programs they had then were kind of, a user group program and the Heroes program. You couldn't apply to the Heroes program. So that wasn't a viable thing, to be able to say, hey, we'll just go out and do amazing things and maybe you can become an AWS hero. Like that's not a way you build community, by giving someone a goal that they don't really know how to reach. And not everyone wants to be a user group leader. And so the genesis of, the doc that Ross wrote, and again, at Amazon, for folks that are not familiar, everything is done with the doc. So you write up a document. It might be a 2-pager, it might be a 4-pager, but the most it can ever be is a 6-pager without the appendices. And so Ross wrote up a doc and basically cast, this vision saying, hey, we need a program that's, big and it's global in scale. But most importantly, it's a program that anyone can join if they meet, like the certain requirements that we want to join. And so Ross wrote up the doc in 2019, Q4, got headcount, and then I started in March. And so interviewed in February, and I was onboarded. And yeah, from there, we were off and running, but it was all based on Ross's vision of us, AWS needing a program that had like an open door that people who wanted to join could join. And that's how the Community Builders program was born.
Hey, a quick pause here. 72% of those who are watching my videos have not subscribed to my YouTube channel.
A few moments later.
Which makes me think, am I doing the right thing? If there's something that I can improve on, if there's something that you think that will make you subscribe to this YouTube channel, please leave in the comment section. While you're watching, if you found at least one valuable tip from this video, consider subscribing and leaving a thumbs up to this video. It will encourage me to have conversations with such important people in moving forward in the future as well.
I'm sure that was not an easy time as well for you, because you were starting off coming from like non-cloud sort of background, and then you had to like learn as well, and then you had to figure out what developers want, and then you knew, like, looking at the developers, they also need the same thing as rest of the community members would want any program that you had run before, right? So it's also very fascinating to sort of, it was a very different period of time in 2020, because it was pandemic, everything was virtual, every meetup, every engagement, every developer was working remotely, tough times, right? And then you all decided to have a program that, like, to launch a program. Like, how was that look like for you back then in 2020?
I guess it was a very tough time for a lot of people. And certainly I would not ever say to anyone that a great time to onboard at a new company is like during a global pandemic. You can't meet your coworkers. I didn't step foot into an Amazon building, I think it was 467 days after I started. Like, it was like a year plus. And certainly at the time, I really wanted to meet some of like my team members, and we were talking about weird things like, hey, let's just go to a park and stand 10 feet apart until we can meet. But anyway, none of those things happened. But the interesting advantage, right, was that if you're starting a community and you want to connect developers together, and the place that those people will meet is in a Slack workspace, and the whole thing is, virtual and global, well, it's almost, it's to your advantage to create something like that, because there are people who want to connect, people that would have maybe gone to a user group meetup previously and they would have connected in person. Well, you're saying, hey, we're starting this new thing. It's all online, it's all virtual. And so there's an opportunity. Now, to be fair, right, you're still competing against a lot of stress and anxiety and, everything that was going on in the world. So it's not like it was a great time to start a community. But it would have been a lot worse if we were trying to start something that was, in person. I mean, I feel like we would have just said, okay, pause, we're like a live event. That would not be the right time to start a live event. But an online community where everyone's in Slack, it wasn't a bad time to start. And as you know, Shafraz, everything happens quickly, at AWS. And the idea is to have bias for action. And so it was really interesting. I was still learning how to work at Amazon and learning the leadership principles and the culture. And there was actually a fair amount of urgency to get it started soon. And I was still figuring out how everything worked. But, we ended up launching the community. I want to say we launched in early July, so 3.5 months before we actually put the beta out the door. And back then it was called Project Skittles. So this is a little insider knowledge for anyone that ever went to a community builders event and you saw some Skittles. That was a nod to our initial program name, but we knew that wasn't going to be the public facing name. And so we had a couple of names, and it went up to the CMO and some senior marketing leadership. And a little fun factoid, if they hadn't gone with community builders, it would have been called the Navigators program, the AWS Navigators. That was actually the one that I preferred. But, and again, hindsight's always 2020. And right now everyone goes, well, no, it has to be community builders. But, back then we were starting from a blank slate, but builder has a lot of weight within Amazon and AWS. And so leadership was like, no, we're going to call it the community builders program. And I was like, okay, cool. A name's a name, let's go. And we started building.
I remember when I was onboarded, I think about 1.5 years later after you. And then the first day when I joined, I was joining a meeting, and I had no idea how things were working.
Yeah.
And my manager told me, hey, Shafra, you got to figure things out.
Yeah.
And go with it. In early days of the program, I still remember when I was working with you, like both of us, we actually split some of the work as well. But before that, it was you alone been managing everything, like from emails to spreadsheets to swags to onboarding, like the whole life cycle of a community builder. It's not easy. From top of your mind, what are some of the hardest operational challenges that you had to face while you were doing these? How did you tackle those?
Oh boy, that question could almost be its own episode, because at the root of it is, how does a community manager function when you have to scale? You're being told to scale and get bigger and grow like you want to, but community managers, no matter what company you're in, we are not typically awash in resources. We don't typically have, tons of resources at our disposal. And like you said, I was just by myself. Now, I will say early on, part of the partnership was with folks in product marketing. I was responsible for running the program, but the initial model of the program was actually working with people on the product marketing side. The theory being is that we wanted to actually give these product marketing folks direct input into the sort of champions for their services that they wanted to be in the program. So fun fact, the first 200, I think it was 220 roughly people that were in the beta, these were actually all hand-picked people by the service teams. So you had people on the machine learning side, on the serverless side. Essentially everyone was a category. And I want to say, I think back then, we had 12 categories when we first launched. It was either 10 or 12. And so I actually had 10 or 12 partners on the product marketing side. And these people said, hey, these are the people we want to be in the community. So initially there was a lot of partnership and there was a lot of working together, and it was actually great. Once we got into the first public cycle, which was later that year, and we had applications, we had, I don't know, I can't remember what my number was, but we had several thousand, applications. Well, maybe let's call it 1,000 in the first year. And all of a sudden there was all this work, like we had to evaluate people and decide whether or not they met the bar, whether or not they met the requirements to join the program. And that's where things started to get a little rocky, because while it was my full-time job to care for the Community Builders program, the folks I was working with on the product side, I was just one of, 20 things that they had to do. And so that's where you get into shared resourcing challenges. That's where you get into, there's a, kind of an Amazonian Jeff Bezos thing. I can't remember what the quote is, right? But you can't rely on someone's best intentions. You can't create something that says, hey, I am going to hope that you decide to do this thing. And that's where you get into mechanisms and flywheels and creating process and structure that doesn't rely on someone's, best intentions. And so in year 2, candidly, that's where the wheels started to fall off a little bit, because Over on the product marketing side, there was a lot of churn, and so you have someone that's doing something and then all of a sudden they leave. And I think so then what do you do as a program owner where you were relying on that person to do a thing? That person isn't there. A new person steps in, and again, they have 20 other things on their list of things to do. And now you're someone that's sort of trying to fight for their attention and trying to say, hey, I really need you to be a part of this. And so that's why over the years, we actually had a couple categories retire from the Community Builders program. So we used to have storage, we used to have Graviton, we used to have a game category, but we couldn't focus on everything. And I think that's also a really important lesson for anyone who wants to build a community is if you build a community for everyone, you built a community for no one. You have to understand who your audience is. You have to understand who are the people that I want to show up in this place that I'm building. And therefore you have to be a little bit picky about how you want to structure it and how you want to put it together. And then over the years, if we didn't get enough buy-in from folks in other teams, it just wasn't a priority for them. I made the call to basically shut down those categories.
There were some fantastic stakeholders that you had as well, like Farah from serverless containers side. She's amazing. Like serverless containers is still one of the most popular categories that people joined as well, right? Yeah. In large organizations, like something that I think the community managers who are running communities for smaller, still growing companies as well need to understand is in larger organizations, there are certain amount of layers that you need to peel if you want to get something done. And also if someone is a part of a program and there's no shared sort of a goal or maybe like a shared responsibility, people tend to drop the ball as well.
One of the great things, and I think this is one of my favorite people that I ever worked with, was because early on, I guess back then it was just APJ. I don't think it was APJC, right? Early on it was APJ, Asia Pacific Japan. You showed a lot of ownership and a desire to kind of own the region. And so as I kind of alluded to, the model was, it kind of failed. I didn't really explain this fully, but the model of working with PMM directly and having someone from those teams sort of like have like a shared responsibility model. Unfortunately, that just got worse in terms of resourcing and in terms of people being willing to, put time towards things. I essentially had to just completely change the model. With Ross's support as my manager, we basically had to say, okay, look, like the model that we had is not working. I was spending almost as much time chasing people on other teams inside AWS as I was focusing on actually running the community. So that's when we switched more to like a regional model. That's when we switched more to a model of more direct ownership. And then eventually that's how we started to get community managers in as shared resources between the community builders and the heroes program, because we just needed more kind of people power inside the team so that we had less vulnerabilities in terms of reliance on external people. And that's, I think, when the community builders program really kind of shifted gears and was able to grow and get even better for the people in it, because we didn't have that same level of reliance. And then at the regional level, I remember you were, very eager to kind of take on things. And that's when we kind of had an unlock and it was like, okay, this is going to be great as long as we can get regional partners. But I could not at the time find another one of you in other regions. And that's where you get into challenges running a program. So you want partners, you want to work with other people at the company, but it's really hard to kind of get that working everywhere. And so we did sort of like a hybrid model where it was like you were looking after APJ and you would handle all the review applications and reviews and everything. And then I was like rest of world essentially. And so I think every program goes through an evolution where you grow, and a big part of the important thing is figuring out what works and what doesn't, and then being fairly ruthless about getting rid of the things that don't work. And even if it means second guessing yourself, throwing out your own ideas, blowing up the business model and just saying, hey, like this isn't working. We have to change things, even inside giant companies like Amazon, and AWS, where you might think there's a ton of resources and you can get anything done. That is not at all the case.
I think that actually led you to have guides for everything that you do. Like when I reached out to you, like for any sort of research, you already had a guide. And then you would walk us through like, this is how you sort of need to do something. You had like guides for everything. One of the very well organized person that I've ever met, Jason, in my like professional career. Why and how do you get into such a rhythm of working?
My job at AWS is, I think, the first time I ever really truly leaned into that kind of documentation side of things. I can't think at my other, community jobs I had at AT&T and at HTC, there wasn't quite the need because I didn't sort of have other people that needed to follow certain things. And you kind of alluded to this before. I have a high bar for quality. I'm not a perfectionist. I don't believe you can ever do things perfectly, but I do believe that there's an appropriate amount of effort you can put into something to make it excellent. And I really believe in serving customers, community members with absolute excellence and not giving them kind of a half-assed, effort and job. And so part of that is essentially saying, okay, here's how we do things. And I want to maintain the quality of how we do things by bringing a guide to be consistent. Because the truth is, most of the time, if someone delivers something subpar, they don't want to deliver something that's subpar. It's typically because they didn't have someone showing them or telling them, here's how we do it. And they just kind of put in their best effort. And so even things like the formatting of webinars and sessions and other sorts of things, like you want to present the customer something consistent because consistency kind of is linked to greater understanding and greater engagement. If every single time you did something, you did it in a different way, the customer experience will be like randomized. They'll think to themselves, what is this company doing? It's kind of like every time you get a marketing email. If that email had things in different places every time, it just gets very confusing. So I think consistency is a really important part of running a community. And part of that consistency is just having like documentation, like this is how we do things. Some of it was for my own benefit, so that every time I did something, I didn't have to try to like reinvent the wheel. And so I did a lot of documentation, but a lot of it is just working with other people, other partners, and making sure that you can give them what they need to be successful with the thing that they need to do.
Yeah, that's something I don't think a lot of people knows about you externally, like how organized you were, like internally, the documentation that you had. We are talking about like when you don't have generative AI tools to like generate all this documentation, you do it by yourself. And I know you don't like, yeah, you don't use much of like Gen AI stuff to like write things as well. But at the same time, now you were like starting to build this program and then you growing it as well. You had a very particular set of like criteria that you looked at when you onboarded something, because not only the experience, we also need to bring in the right people in. So what type of personas or the characteristics did you look at when you were bringing in people to the program?
Early on with the program we established, we had, corporate goals, right? Like, what does the company want to accomplish? Well, it was an advocacy program, and I never hid that, right? It was a community advocacy program for AWS. So number one, we look for people that were already AWS fans or people that were interested, keen on learning more about AWS, which is obviously a great place to start when you're building a community. It's a lot harder if nobody knows who you are, nobody cares about who you are, and you have to generate that interest. That's why I think any startup that's listening, their first hire, when they're building the team actually shouldn't be, at least on the developer side, shouldn't be a community person. They should hire a really talented developer advocate that has their technical chops and they can go out there and show the product and the service and build up genuine customer interest. And that's the genesis of the community. So a great developer advocate is where most startups should start. And then once there's that groundswell and there's that creation of interest, then you hire a community manager and you grow that over time. But anyway, getting back to your point, we were looking for people that were, that essentially wanted to go deeper with AWS. And so all of the program structure was based on that. So early on, right, we made a choice. Do we have an application form, or is this just something that anyone can join? Well, any community early on, you have to decide, like, is this an exclusive thing that has some kind of criteria attached to it? Or is this something where anyone can join? And these are two very, very different types of communities. And every community program manager has to decide what type of community do they want to create. So for me, with the community builders, we said, hey, like we want this program to grow, to thousands of people, but we also want it to be like the right people. And I wanted a community of people that were engaged and interested, even if that meant a smaller community, than a community of 10,000 people where only 1,000 people were interested. Like I wanted to have a very high rate of engagement and kind of buy-in from the community members. So part of that application process was give us 2 examples of content that you've created that help other builders. So that could be an article, a blog post, a video, whatever it is, but something that says, I am a technical builder and I'm going to tell other technical builders how I use AWS services to kind of solve my challenges or solve problems. And that's what we really leaned into, which was interesting because it shocked a lot of people. I think in our first public intake, only about 10% of people got in. Our first couple of years, we only had kind of a 10 to 12% acceptance rate. And it is a weird thing where you fill out a form and then you get rejected. So we were rejecting, 90 out of every 100 people. That was kind of mind blowing to people. They're like, wait a second. Like, what do you mean I can't get in? And it was like, well, here's what we're looking for. And so, as you know, Shafraz, there was a lot of education and then we would also point people to like great examples of great content. And so anytime you have something where someone has to apply and there's kind of criteria, you also need to show people like, who are the people that are getting in? Who are the people that are doing the things that meet the criteria that we are looking for? And that's, I think, a really, really important part of building a community is identifying who the people are that you want and then telling them like, what are the things we need to see in you when you apply? Because if you keep it vague and no one really knows, that just creates a lot of frustration. And so you really want to be clear about what your requirements are for the community.
Yeah, of course. Like after you brought in all these like highly engaging individuals, what happened was it actually created a flywheel effect. And after a certain point, it reached a critical mass, and then now you don't have to do any like paid media or maybe like pay any dollars to promote this program. It's self-sufficient. People apply. People knows, like builders knows about it. I feel like the second year it was not the case. Second year, I think the third or the fourth intake, right? It took a bit of time to sort of find that momentum. So now you are saying like it's important to showcase like the people who have been doing some of the work. Like take us through like how was it like engaging these like highly engaged individuals, like what type of work you had to do. What was your like experience?
I'm actually going to disagree with you a little bit on something you said. We're going to get spicy here, Shafraz. I actually think one of the biggest challenges we had early on was I could not scale to evaluate, 3,000 or 4,000 applications in the early years. And so I was kind of terrified about over promoting it. And so to your point, in the history of the program, we've never spent a penny on any kind of paid media. We never spent a penny promoting anything on social media. We only ever used the AWS social media channels. But in the early years, we didn't even do that. All we did was we relied on just organic word of mouth from the community itself. And early on, when we got like 1,000 applications, I was like sweating. I'm like, oh my God, like we have so many applications. And so I was purposefully like kind of almost quiet about promoting it because we had this challenge of not having enough resources. Now it is a wonderful challenge to have almost, like too much success. But the truth is, when you're doing a program, you have to make steps that will not lead to customer frustration and to kind of failure for you. And so, early on, we weren't quiet about it, but, we post on LinkedIn and kind of a couple of personal channels, but we really relied on the members of the community to be the ones that were doing almost all of the sharing, which is great because then it means that these people are doing things out of authenticity. They're doing things because they want to and because they care about the program. And for me, that was always the most wonderful thing. I had people contacting me constantly saying, Jason, like, I want to talk about the Community Builders program. Like, do you have some slides I could use, or do you have some things we can give you? And I would always say no. Like, other than the logo, I want you to talk about what you think about the program and marketing, and it's my job to promote the program. I have not much in the way of authenticity about the value of this program. The developers in the program have all of the authenticity. And so I relied very heavily on community and word of mouth, promotion. And even to this day, that is still all we rely upon. And in the last cycle, I mean, there were over 4,000, applications. I think it was one of the biggest ones ever. And so, yeah, so demand, thankfully, was never an issue. And I'm always super, super grateful for that.
It's quite interesting. Like now that it has reached to a point where there are about close to 4,000 people in the community, insane amount of really impactful stories that we found as well as a part of this like program. Some folks, they were like creating like workshops for students, for thousands of students that they learn from in their local languages and from like places like in North America, like some of the community builders, they were hosting live events for people to do certification. A lot of great stuff, stories. Like top of your mind, any stories that you want to like bring up? I'm sure those are in thousands, but any top of mind stories.
I think the most interesting thing to me just about the impact that community builders have is because there's so many of them, and because they all have a heart for doing things to help other builders, learn and grow with, how their AWS journeys. The most interesting thing to me was just the breadth of things that they would do. So as you know, Shafraz and anyone in the program knows, we have this thing called the content reporting tool. It's a pretty janky tool. It badly needs a rewrite. And if I still worked at AWS today, I would probably try to vibe code my way towards some kind of, better solution. But the most interesting thing was just all the stuff they did. And, before I left AWS, last I checked, I think we were a little bit over 25,000 things that they had put in there. So that's, podcasts, blog posts, speaking live in an event, doing videos, doing training sessions. And so just the passion that the community has for creating things to help other builders is just off the charts. Now, at the specific level, I mean, there's lots of interesting things that we saw, too many for me to talk about, but two kind of come to top of mind. At the time, he was a community builder, and that was a hero. But, there was Matt Coulter, who made like CDK days. And so this was this thing that he had this passion around CDK, and he really wanted to make an event. And when he was a community builder, he created this, worked with other community builders, I think some other heroes, and just created something net new that, as far as I know, is still happening, every year. It was wildly successful. And so it was amazing seeing a builder create something from scratch that became like a global event, that was really successful. And then a more recent example was at reInvent, and around that time frame, there was a community builder, and unfortunately, I can't remember his name, but he was in South Korea. And it was so cool. I think it was in January, early January, he did a community builder day. And it was not like a community day. It was like a community builder day. And it was this event specifically for the community builders in South Korea, all those folks to come together and create, a learning kind of, presentation day. But they called it a community builders day. I love seeing people create things that have the heart of what the community builders program is about, which is, sharing what you know with other people and helping them on their technical journey, their career journey, all those types of things. So to me, those are two examples of what I love seeing in the program. And there were just thousands more.
Yeah. The person who created that event from Korea is Chris Park. Yes, he became a hero as well. Yeah. This also like tells us a story about like once you like have a program that is running like an engine that actually helps to grow not only that program but also rest of the ecosystem as well. Like I always call out like the AWS Community Builders program as an engine that helps to run other programs. Now, like if you look at like now, see Chris was a community builder and then became a hero. Even Matt, right? Like those people, like they become heroes as well. When places where we don't see user groups, sometimes we find community builders and then they start user groups. So it helps to sort of nurture the rest of the ecosystem as which is nice. Like there's this notion of people say, okay, there's product like growth, like product speaks for itself. It's very easy and then it runs by itself. This community like growth, CLG.
It's an excellent point. And yeah, I agree. A good community is going to be an engine, and a good community will have momentum and, forward motion and a lot of benefits on both sides. So I'm really big on community having reciprocal benefits. A successful community is going to benefit both the people kind of paying for the community, like the company, and also the people with it. So to your point, right? The Community Builders Program was this engine and this kind of funnel for a whole bunch of other interesting things. Virtually every hero from the past 2 years was a community builder. So the community builder was like a direct funnel into the Heroes program. We had, before I departed, I think I want to say we hit 100 or 102 AWS employees that were community builders. So we never intended this to be a recruiting pipeline, and we kind of shied away from that. Like, we didn't do like job postings and things like that. I didn't want to undermine the authenticity of the community. But as an interesting side effect, right, we did more than 100 employees, and anyone that's worked at Amazon or tried to work at Amazon knows the bar for hiring is very high. There's a super rigorous interview process. We could do a whole video on that. But I feel very proud to know that there were 100 community builders that made it into Amazon. And then as well, you have other types of things that the community builder program has funneled into. Last year, the Road to Reinvent. The marketing team had this kind of wacky idea, like, we're going to do like a mobile hackathon on some buses. And, it's going to be $100,000 prize. And this idea, frankly, came out of nowhere. Like, we had no notice that this was coming. And the community builders and the Heroes program together provided them the participants that they needed. And we had 50 people participate. I think 35 of them were community builders and 15 of them were heroes. And if you didn't have community, if you didn't have kind of like this built-in pool of people that want to engage with AWS, those types of things would be kind of a failure because they didn't have the time to go out and recruit from the general public. And so I think any community program inside a company should be embedded, and everyone in the company should know who these people are and how they can tap into them for, that mutual benefit. Because the people that got to go on the Road to Reinvent, they got cool tracksuits, and they got, like a free ticket to Reinvent, and they got all these benefits. And it was, mutually beneficial. And then, of course, the winning team got $100,000, which is pretty cool as well, because who doesn't like money?
All this momentum happened because you had a process that in place, and also you are someone who really value the quality of work. Like, you're someone who goes behind, I think, the customer experience. Like, you really value that one. That's how you maintain the quality of a program. You're big on quality, like especially with swags. If you look at, you raise the bar like very high. And then internally we call you as the head of swags or the swag king too. Can you just explain why are you so big on like the quality of the swags?
For as long as I remember, and I don't know if this is because I'm a firstborn child, and a lot of firstborn children are type A personalities. I've always just really cared about quality. I believe if you're willing to do something, you should give it 100% of your effort, and the output should be the best it could be. Now, not perfection. That last 10% or 1% is maybe not going to be worth your time, but you shouldn't do anything with lackluster effort. Because honestly, if that's what you're going to do or all you have time to do, it's better to not do it. And to your point, yeah, it can be a little challenging, right? If a coworker doesn't quite do something in the way that you would like it to be done, you as the program owner, you have to decide, like, is it, do I have a good enough relationship with this person where I can ask them nicely, I'm a Canadian, I try to be nice, can you fix this, can you do it, or is there a problem with my documentation, with my process? How can I help you to hit the bar better next time? And so I think that there is 100%, there's onus on program owners to make sure that the things they're delivering to people they're working with allow them to hit that quality bar. But I think part of it also is just like, number one, setting a good example. So if you're going to expect a high bar from other people, a high quality bar, well, you need to deliver that as well. And I also think there's a bit of like an inspiration angle too. Like, if you're someone that is known for high quality, hopefully people around you will also try to, up their game to kind of make sure that their efforts are not dramatically different than yours. Now on the swag front, I mean, chef, we could do a whole hour on swag, buddy. Everybody loves some good swag. What Show them what you're drinking from, Chef Roz. What are you drinking from right now? Right, the AWS Community Builder swag item, and yeah, it's like this H2Go, mug. I mean, it's nothing special, but I probably looked at 6 or 8 different water container, in order to pick the right one. And as you know, Shaf, and this is, again, I don't want to go too far down this road. I'll be actually doing a separate webinar in the near term future about swag, interestingly enough. So keep an eye out for that. Swag should be fun, and it should be something that people feel proud to wear, to use, to, do whatever. I think people that don't think swag is important are missing a big thing. It would be kind of like telling the NFL that selling team jerseys to customers isn't important. I don't know how much money the NFL makes off of selling, football, soccer, like whatever your sport is, right? People want to identify with things that they care about. And so part of swag's purpose is to basically say like, hey, I'm part of this team, I'm part of this community, this tribe, and I will proudly represent that because I want people to notice and I want people to say, oh, hey, like you're part of this thing, you're a community builder, tell me about it. People want to talk about things that they care about. And so in the same way that you would never wear swag from some company that you don't like or, you don't care about, I wanted to create things that people, would care about. And part of that is the quality of the item. Companies that create crappy swag don't do themselves any favors. And it means that their customer isn't going to want to rep, if you do some thin $3 t-shirt that falls apart after one wash, what are you telling your own customers about your company and about what you think of them? And so in the same way that a company cares about the quality of their services and their products and their offering for customers, they should have the same level of quality and care with the swag that they give to those same customers. And there should be no difference between the two.
Yeah, of course, 100%. I still remember reaching out to you and showing some of the things that we have produced and then getting you to sort of give an approval. Recently, me and Ridhima, we were discussing about a backpack that she gave at the reInvent, and then, hey, Shaf, this was Jason approved. So that means it's a good quality swag.
I like that backpack. Honestly, I have one hanging downstairs in my basement right now. Yeah, it was a good quality. And since we talk about what we're drinking out of, I want to make sure people on the camera see my cool Chewbacca mug. So this is like my retro, this is I think from like the 1970s or 1980s comic book. And so I'm not drinking out of Community Builder swag, but I am drinking some delicious orange tea from a Chewbacca mug.
That's pretty cool. Like there's a different side. I think we can talk about it later in a different episode where how much of like movies that you have. And that's one of the trivia questions also when you onboard some people, like the community builders are annually, you ask as well. So it's quite interesting. For me, of course, like swags does two things. One is it creates sense of belongingness and it creates an identity that people want to showcase that they're part of, as you were like explaining it well. Is there like a swag that you weren't able to make that you wish that you ever wanted to make?
Yes. The swag that never was. I would say actually two things. So I'm going to grab a prop here. And so there's two things. So number one, this is my laptop. This is my work laptop. Oh, it's like vanishing. I don't have a cloaking field on my work laptop. Okay, so now it's kind of in focus there. But you can see I have so this is just a MacBook Pro, but you can see I have like a vinyl skin with the Community Builders logo on the MacBook. So one example of swag, so I did this, several years ago. It's just a vinyl skin from, there's tons of online companies that do, custom vinyl skins and you upload your own logo and you make it. But this example, so many people ask for this and they're like, oh, like this is so cool. Like I want to, rep the Community Builders program on my laptop because there are so many different types of laptops and so many different dimensions. This is the kind of swag that I never managed to do because when you get into swag, you have to make decisions, right, about how complex will this swag be to bring to market, right? So at the least end of complexity is it's just a thing that someone, holds or uses, and there is no sizing. So drink mugs, backpacks, gadget pouches, or whatever. So that's like the easy end of swag. The harder end of swag is anything that involves sizing, because now all of a sudden, and are you going to do like a unisex or fitted, for different folks, sizing, so you got, extra small up to maybe, 4 or 5 XL. You want to serve your customers with giving them swag that they can wear. So you need a bunch of different sizes. A laptop vinyl sticker would be like as if there was 100 different sizes for your t-shirt. So virtually impossible to do. I did explore working with one of these companies to get like a coupon code, and then you give it to the customer, and the customer goes to the website, uses the coupon code, and then gets the particular thing for their size. I didn't end up doing that because it would need too many resources and it's too complex. And this is something that every community person or every program manager also has to weigh, is you might have a good idea, but how complicated is it to scale? What level of complexity is there? And will it blow up in your face and use up so many resources to keep it going that you will in fact regret ever saying yes to doing it? So that's one example of swag that is just too complicated to execute. And then the other swag sample that I was going to do, full backpack for community builders. So the V3 community builders backpack was heralded as just a really good backpack. And we did a couple versions. The second version was the first truly custom version. And so with my swag partner, we did like custom from scratch backpack. That's super exciting, when companies make custom swag. But I wanted to do like a really high-end custom travel backpack, and I wasn't quite able to make it happen. But I do have a design file that I might share on my personal blog or LinkedIn at some point in the future, because it was going to be pretty fantastic, if I do say so myself, Shifraz. Yeah.
I think I have one of those like bigger backpacks, like the customized versions of those you gave to me like last year.
So our team offsite, right? Because I think you've got one at the team offsite, and that's another example of where swag can not only be used for customers, but can be used, for employees. And so what I did, I don't have one in front of me here. Maybe we can drop it in post. We can put the backpack up here. Look, this is the backpack. When you're creating a custom product, right, you can kind of do it in 2 phases. And so what I did was I got the backpacks made with I got kind of blanks made. And so it's a custom backpack, but I didn't get the logo put on all of them. I had someone that didn't have the logo. And then that allowed me to repurpose it for the community team. And then I got, custom embroidery work on the backpack. And so now it's like a cool swag product. It's high quality and interesting, but you can actually use it for both an external and an internal audience. And that's, I think, a way of thinking about swag that's a little different. You look at it as kind of like I don't want to use the word platform because that's overstating it, but something that you can build upon and customize depending on the audience. And so it's sort of thinking a little bit ahead about how you execute your swag.
If we go a little bit beyond about like how you were actually building this program, you have like a ton of experience building these programs and scaling those as well. Now, there are many programs that are coming up, started by now these new AI native companies, and then those are growing up very fast as well. They have like the people in social media have different opinions about these programs. Some folks, they find it like, hey, too marketing ish, too salesy. They just want to kind of get the effort for free of charge, that just be volunteer for a brand. Versus what I feel is there's not much of love. Like when you're a part of a community, there's love attached to it as well. And then some of these newer programs that are coming up doesn't seem to be having that love element or relationship element. What advice do you have, Jason, for those folks who are starting off all these newer programs?
2 words: be human. They're very simple words, but honestly, Shafraz, a lot of people that do community work, they're not human enough. And like what I mean by that is you want to be human and you want people to know that they're part of a community led by a person and not just a mouthpiece for a corporation. So I'll give you a perfect example of this. Early on in the first year of the Community Builders program, I was sending out some emails, right? And here's another little secret, right? Of emails. we didn't have an email platform that we could use. And so Shafraz, as you know, I became not only the swag king, but the mail merge king, right? Because we would have to use Outlook mail merge. We would have to use technology that was designed probably, I think, in the late 90s for like mailing labels on paper envelopes. Like that's what mail merge actually, comes from, right? We would repurpose it. Now people use it for sending out emails. And so we would send out, these emails. And when you're sending out, emails, you kind of get a choice, right? Who is this email from? And so early on, we had a community builders inbox, and it was just a shared exchange account, and we used it to kind of, send emails back and forth. I think there's probably, as an aside, you have to decide early on in a community of where you draw the line on how deeply you will engage with that community, right? Are you going to engage with them from like a corporate email address, or are you going to let them, you'd email them from your personal address? Are you going to join a WhatsApp group and engage with them kind of 24/7? Or are you going to kind of time box your engagement in a way that says, I live in this part of the world and I'm going to, engage with you from like, 9 to 5 p.m. or whatever it might be. And so community managers have to think about how broad their surface area is for engaging. But anyway, back to my original point. I made a decision early on to not send the emails out signed the AWS community team, which at the time, my friend Ross actually kind of wanted me to, or he suggested like, hey, are you not going to send these out, from the AWS community team? I was sending them out with my name. The email said, this is from Jason Dunn, community builders program manager. And so there's a tendency when you work for a big company to kind of hide behind the corporate name and to not put your names on things and to sort of have everything be a little generic and a little corporate. I very purposely wanted them to know that there was a real human sending this email from a real Outlook inbox. And when they hit reply, they would get a real human reading it. And so that is one example of sort of being human and establishing right out of the gate that like you're a person and you're not a team of people. That was actually one of the reasons why I didn't want to do it. Like in addition, the primary reason was just be human and be a real person on the other end of the email. The other reason why is I didn't want there to be some misunderstanding that the community builders team is like, 5 or 10 people. There is no team when there's only one of you. So I think establishing that is really important. And then that translates all the way into all of your communications. When I'm doing my Friday announcements, those proved to be weirdly popular, and people actually, it was the number one thing that people would say to me when I would travel all around the world and meet community builders. The number one thing people would say, "Hi, Jason. Oh, so nice to meet you. I love your Friday announcements." And to me, that was just like a bizarre, like, what? Like you like my announcements? But the announcements wove in some of that humanity. I would always greet people. I would talk about, hey, like, what are you up to this weekend? I did this, or I'm traveling here. I would talk about like whatever was interesting me at the time. I just got a 3D printer, or, I'm entering a great season for solar energy. I'd talk about, nerdy, green power things that I find interesting. And the announcements were from Jason Dunn, not from a Slack account that was like the AWS community builders announcement or whatever. So being human and showing your community that there's a real person at the center of all of this pays dividends in ways I can't even begin to describe. Not the least of which is that if there's any kind of community conflict or friction or issues between members, you get to engage with them as a moderator, as a person, and as someone they know, not some nameless, faceless, moderator that's telling them they're doing something wrong. And that is, just a tiny bit of why being human in a community is just absolutely critical.
I think one of the key challenges for like community managers are also not necessarily like community managers, like people who are building relationships, like especially DevRel, is seen as someone who is working very closely with their audience. They learn from them. But at the same time, one of the challenge these folks will also get is like they get too much of those as well. Yeah, like I think that's one of the reasons that some of the folks like stay behind the like curtain and then send out through this like aliases, etc. There definitely is human element to it, but at the same time a scaling element to it as well. But what I really like about the thing that you touched base on is I also really loved your Friday posts because it gives you like what actually is happening in the program, And also tell us a story about yourself. How was your week? Like, were you traveling somewhere? Do you feel exhausted? Did you how did you feel? Did you buy a new 3D printer? Or maybe like some days, like you say, hey, I'm hitting the road. I'm on my way to Canada to visit my relatives. So I think that creates a non-corporate bonding that goes beyond just being a part of a program versus being very close to like a friend at times, right? When you like go to a different like country, you have like bunch of friends. That's what we also tell all these community folks as well. Like, hey, you have a network. If you look at it, it's more than a network. It's a connection based out of trust, humanity. I think that's worth preserving, especially like folks who are working at several organizations and also like as community managers continues to do that. Now, Jason, things are changing rapidly. AI is changing a lot of things. Like I did before your departure, we were chatting as well. What if there's a community for AI agents, which actually happened, right? Like with open.
Both Moltbook, I think that was the one where they
We're a mode book.
all the Claude bots or whatever were exchanging messages. So yeah,
Yeah.
wild time,
So
wild time.
it's happening at this time, but at the same time, that human element still very much relevant. And it was very apparent when you post up in LinkedIn and said like you're leaving from the company and then also from the program as well. It actually, if you look at like the responses, those are very emotional. Yeah, some folks, they didn't feel like staying back in the program because Jason Dunn is not there. So how was that feeling, Jason? How did you cope up with that?
One thing, that I want to say is, well, first off, I really want to thank everyone, for their support. It blew me away. The day that the Amazon layoffs were announced, early morning, I discovered at 4 a.m. on January 28th. That day will certainly live in infamy, for a lot of us at Amazon. All I could think to do, like, I wanted to kind of acknowledge that something had happened, but it was so raw and just so upsetting. I did not know what to do. And so I simply posted a broken heart emoji on LinkedIn, just one single character, no other words, just the emoji. And that went, hilariously. It was the most viral thing I think I've ever done in my life, certainly on LinkedIn. Last I checked, it had, 320,000, impressions, like reach, like that just reached a lot of people. Which, right message, right time, right medium, so there's lots of things that people can learn about, when is the right time to communicate. But, so number one for me, I just want to, thank people for their support. Interestingly, when I talk about, being human and, kind of being really a part of your community and in a very human way, the other side effect of that is I genuinely thought that I was so ingrained with the Community Builders program, sort of like two pieces of paper that are glued together, that no one would ever think it would be a good idea to try to rip apart two pieces of paper that are glued together because it's just going to make a huge mess. I was wrong. Now it is still being run. There's some, great people, Corey and Paxton and folks that are still running the program, and I wish them success, but it was a very traumatizing thing, for the community. I mean, it was a traumatizing thing, for me. As anyone who knows me knows, I lean in very heavily to my work, and there's a lot of my heart and soul in the Community Builders program. And when I was told that I would no longer, be able to lead that program and be a part of Amazon anymore, that was, deeply, deeply hurtful and deeply upsetting. And over time, I've grown to accept it. You go through the path of grief and, loss and frustration and all these other things. But certainly the outpouring of support from the community was absolutely incredible. And it even continues to this day.
It's been a long recording session today. Before I let you go, Jason, any message that you want to give to past, present, and future AWS community builders as the person who launched this program?
Sure. Well, I would just love to say, anyone that was ever a community builder, in the first 6 years that I was leading the program. I just want to say thank you. The program would have been nothing without you. You know, a community is a success because of the people in it. It still has to have competent leadership, and I hopefully, you know, was a competent leader, and I definitely felt successful in my role. But it was amazing because of all of you. And so all the amazing things that happened over, you know, the 6 years that I was there, none of those things would have happened without community builders. And so I feel a deep sense of gratitude to all of you. I also learned an incredible amount. You know, I had the ability to travel the world and meet folks from all over the place. And it was genuinely the hardest job I've ever had, but also the best job I've ever had. It was an incredible privilege to lead the community. And yeah, I guess for anyone who's a future community builder, you know, the folks that joined without me there, I still hope that the spirit of the program, the structure, the things that I put into place will remain. And I hope that all of you will have a successful, you know, journey in the program. And I hope that you have a successful journey with AWS and learning new and exciting stuff. So thank you, past, present, and future community builders.
Thank you so much for taking time today and for doing this video. I'll be waiting to do this video for a long time. And thank you so much for joining, Joseph.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Shafraz. It was a privilege to be able to talk with you and be part of the Builder story. So thanks for having me.